There we go. All right, everyone. So we tried this once. Didn't go great. We're going to do it again. I'm Natasha.
I'm Karen.
I'm Sarah.
I'm Cheryl.
I'm Brianna.
And I'm Corinne. I'm the policy coordinator at Transgender Law Center.
It worked! Welcome, Corinne. Thank you for bearing with us. Sorry about this.
No problem.
So excited to have you as a guest today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So Karen, I'm going to let you take lead on this one since you know Corinne and have been going back and forth more about what you were going to talk about today. And I'm going to sit back and be lazy, a lazy host.
I want to go further and say I admire Corinne. So you'll recall I was speaking of a bill in California last year that I encouraged everyone to call the governor about. Corinne, tell us how that bill turned out.
Yeah, so that bill was Senate Bill 179, which was the bill that's going to allow gender-neutral markers on birth certificates and licenses in California, and it went great. So we're looking at implementation later this year.
And what was your involvement in that bill?
So TLC was a co-sponsor of that bill. TLC is Transgender Law Center, and so I helped write it and push for it.
That's so fantastic.
Yeah. So we're really excited to be there. There was another bill kind of in the same space last year, Senate Bill 310, which is making sure that folks who are incarcerated had access to name and gender changes. So we're trying to move the bar further out here.
Beautiful. So we've got a change maker in our midst. Very exciting.
Yeah.
A gladiator.
Yeah. So thanks for calling when y'all did that last year. Really appreciate it.
Yay.
Absolutely. And so we were speaking of freedom of conscience recently. And I got to talking to Corinne about that, and obviously that is an interest to her as well. But I thought it might be fun to get a general picture of kind of the landscape for transgender issues.
Yeah.
I think we really talked about them directly since we called in about the military ban, which infuriated us all so much. So what's going on this year? What's the story?
Well, just like in kind of every sector, there's a lot going on here these days, most of it not great. But we've kind of been facing a larger wave of backlash even before the Trump administration took power. So at the state level, even before that, we've been seeing lots of anti-trans attacks to the point where last year, I think 15 states saw and defeated bathroom bills. So bills that attempt to limit where trans people can pee based on their birth certificate or other factors like that. Luckily, those were all defeated last year. And so we've seen kind of modifications of stuff like that that are beginning to be more and more targeted at trans people is where the trend is going. And then particularly stuff aimed at trans kids has been going around lately. So stuff specifically like bathroom bills specifically focusing on schools or healthcare exclusion specifically focusing on kids. And so that kind of seems to be where things are going. And so,
why go for the vulnerable when you can go for the super vulnerable?
Right, exactly. And so what's happening here to some degree is that our opponents are kind of finding the issues that people are less familiar with and going after those because it's harder for them to kind of push on gay-specific rights these days. But folks are still less likely to know transgender people, so they're less likely to understand our issues. And so we're now kind of the go-to object of obsession for folks who are trying to push regressive agendas. But we have a pretty good track record. Again, so 15 states saw bad bathroom bills last year, and all of them were defeated. There were a couple states who tried really, really hard, like Texas. Texas had bathroom bills in their regular session, and then they called a whole special session where one of the calls included in, the call to the special session was specifically to deal with trans people in bathrooms. But even in that special session where they'd been really focused on limiting where trans people could use the bathroom, they failed there again. So that felt really good. That kind of, despite how hard they're pushing, we've done pretty well so far. And so they're still kind of branching out into these other areas where they're seeing more success. So one place where they have seen success is, so last year in Texas, we helped to stop those bathroom bills, but Texas did manage to push through a bill that allows discrimination in the child welfare system and adoption and fostering kids. So not only could agencies refuse to place kids with queer couples, the bill also gave folks a lot of rights to kind of subject kids to potentially conversion therapy, or force them to attend churches and or go through religious activities that don't affirm the kid. And so we've seen that kind of spreading around as well. There are a lot of child welfare system bills this year that we're watching.
That's disappointing. Very disappointing.
Yeah, yeah. And then kind of the other place, so the two places that people have probably seen where bad things have passed were Indiana with the RFRA from a couple years ago. That was kind of where that kind of bill broke onto the national consciousness and caused a lot of fervor and furor and noise. And, Indiana quickly had to backpedal on that. And now, of course, Mike Pence is the vice president. And then I think everyone also probably heard things around North Carolina and their HB2, which is a massive preemption bill. So preemption, what that's saying is that municipalities can't enact like non-discrimination protections more specific or that go further than the state protections. And so North Carolina's bill was kind of sweeping. It dealt with not just LGBT non-discrimination protections, but like minimum wage laws, kind of everything across the board. And so what we saw there is a huge backlash, just like happened in Indiana. But the state passed a fix that was supposed to be like a compromise. But since the initial effort, was just already terrible, the compromise doesn't get you anywhere good. You're still just kind of like in a terrible spot. Mm-hmm. And so they still have preemption on local municipalities passing non-discrimination ordinances until 2020. It's still not a place that's welcoming to trans folks. They're still not explicitly allowed to use the bathrooms that they're most comfortable in. And so that's kind of that was the second big place, like state level action where things kind of blew up and hit the national consciousness. And then I think to a smaller degree, the most recent example of that is kind of Mississippi. In 2016, they passed a bill that was HB 1523, which is a bill that enumerates out specific religious beliefs. So in this case, like the fact that marriage is between man and one woman, or like how certain religions view trans people, and kind of enshrined those into law and gave people who believe those specific religious beliefs kind of an exemption from non-discrimination law, explicitly allowing them to discriminate against LGBT people based on those specific religious beliefs. And so obviously there was a challenge to that filed immediately. It presents kind of immediate concerns just on its face by pulling out specific religious beliefs and supporting those. But unfortunately, at the end of last year, that specific court case was tossed out based on standing. And so I think what we're waiting for in Mississippi now is to be able to find someone who's been explicitly harmed by that bill, and then to take a case forward showing that that person had been harmed. The court was just saying you have to wait until somebody's actually been hurt, which is really frustrating. But that's what happened in that case. And so those are kind of the three state level anti-trans or anti-LGBT bills that have kind of been in the consciousness recently. And then, of course, there's a whole host of changes and regressions at the federal level that have been affecting LGBT people and then trans people specifically. If folks are interested, I can get into some of those.
Yeah, of course we are.
Yeah. So one of the first things that the Trump administration did was around kids in schools. So the Obama administration had in 2015, I think, issued some guidance on how they interpreted Title IX. So Title IX is the law that protects people from discrimination in school settings. And people are familiar with it from thinking about women's sports parity with men's sports in colleges. But it also has really strong non-discrimination provisions. And so those are based on sex. And so the Obama administration's guidance was clarifying that they consider sex to include gender identity and sexual orientation. And so because of that, they were then providing guidance to schools that, to comply with Title IX, you have to do these things to support transgender students. You can't discriminate against them. You can't send them into the wrong bathrooms. It's part of Title IX. So that guidance gave schools a framework on how to proceed forward. There had been kind of a lot of confusion on most levels because a lot of schools, don't have to think about this until they have a trans kid. And in some places at small schools that hadn't happened before, still maybe even hasn't happened yet. And so having that guidance was super important, both to make sure that kids currently, like trans kids currently in school, had access to the right facilities and the support they needed, but also so that schools could really be prepared and not be like surprised and caught off guard and scrambling to like make a policy up on the fly when they did have a trans kid come out. And so what happened once Trump took office is they rescinded that guidance very, very quickly, so that schools are no longer provided with that guidance. They're just kind of left hanging again. And then more recently, a couple of weeks ago, the Department of Education announced that they won't even be considering discrimination complaints from trans kids who are sent to the wrong bathrooms. Like the Department of Education office that would normally be investigating those claims has just decided not to take them. They'll be taking other discrimination claims, but they will just completely ignore any complaints from trans kids who are being discriminated against in schools. So that's super frustrating. And then there's kind of a whole host of other attacks. I think probably one of the larger ones that people have heard about, and that's constantly in the news because of like various court cases, is the ban on trans people serving in the military. That's gone through several iterations. I think I read this week, though, that the Pentagon announced that they just enrolled their first new trans enrollee since this policy happened. I haven't followed that super closely, so I'm just kind of aware of it peripherally. But I know that there's some organizations who are involved in some litigation around that. And then there's a whole healthcare aspect of this that I've been working on a little more closely. So specifically, HHS, Health and Human Services, has a department called the Office of Civil Rights. And in January, they issued a new rule saying that they would be creating a new office in the Office of Civil Rights that would be devoted not to protecting marginalized people's access to healthcare, which was the nominal mission of the Office of Civil Rights, but instead to actively going after and assisting people who have religious objections to providing healthcare to certain people. And so that's kind of one of the largest things going right now, and I think that's going to be the action that we'll take today. So the way that federal rules and regulations work is typically they have to go.
Corinne, I think you just broke Natasha's heart.
Yeah.
Is that the worst thing you've heard today, Natasha?
That's how bad it is that I have to go, is it? But probably, yeah.
Yeah, that's awful.
It is.
And it just blows my mind that they've put this office directly under the Office of Civil Rights. So it's just really perverting the purpose and mission of the Office of Civil Rights, which until now had been charged with safeguarding people's access to healthcare. And now there's this whole team in that office who's focused on restricting people's access to healthcare. It really boggles my mind. And there's actually...
It's extra mean.
Yeah, if I can find it, there was this quote that the administration gave when they announced the creation of this office that just really struck me as kind of symbolic for their approach to these issues going forward just generally. And I think I had it up over here on this screen. So this is said by the Office of Civil Rights Director. His name is Severino. And he said that no one should be forced to choose between helping sick people and living by one's deepest moral or religious convictions. And I'm just really struck by placing deep moral and religious convictions in opposition to helping sick people. That just blew my mind that someone would say that so plainly and frankly. And I can't imagine what comms director would ever have okayed that. But
that's someone who believes that their deep moral convictions are really, they don't believe that it's judgment, but they're all about passing judgment. That's really
right.
Well, and I would in my blog I wrote about it, Harper Jean Tobin from the National Center for Transgender Equality had a really good quote that I think sums it up well. That is, this is just the use of religion to hurt people because you disapprove of who they are. Any rule that grants the license to discriminate would be a disgrace and a mockery of the principle of religious freedom that we all cherish. And just general human decency of being a health provider and providing health care.
Yeah. And so it's just a real particular concern because a lot of the times what people say when they hear about things like this are, oh, that's fine. Someone can just go somewhere else to get their health care.
Not when you're
but
sick.
yeah, and in a lot of places in the country, like especially rural places, there's nowhere else to go, right? There's one hospital within 100, 200 miles, and if you're turned away there, you often don't have other places to go. And I think that the Center for American Progress had done a really good study on that. That has some numbers. I don't have them in front of me, but they're very striking in terms of people, especially in rural areas, saying, like, I really wouldn't have anywhere else to go if I was turned away because I was LGBT, or, because I was seeking contraceptive services or an abortion or something like that. There's aren't places for folks to go in a lot of the country who are outside large metropolitan areas. It can be like a healthcare desert out there.
And even if you do have somewhere else to go, there's no guarantee that they would take you either. Like if you live down here in Texas, the odds of finding somebody, and then you run into that thing where there's one doctor within a 300-mile radius who will take people, and then they have like a backed up appointment log of like 6 months because everybody's trying to go to them.
Right.
Listen.
And it's worth mentioning that a lot of this is also aimed at access to abortion, and so Texas particularly is already struggling really heavily with the abortion access in terms of waiting periods and just in terms of like how few clinics there are.
I think the state that attempted to pass the legislation to like make abortion clinics regulated like hospitals and having like specific lengths between the doorways and stuff like that, like just ridiculous shit to try to close them down.
Yeah, lots of states have done that. I'm from Louisiana. Louisiana did that recently as well.
And we have the highest like maternal mortality rate of any developed nation.
Just
Texas specifically. Like it's beyond belief. It's just, I mean, they literally are taking steps back in time by like 200 years and are happy about it. They're glad.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just like talked myself into incoherence. Okay, go ahead.
Oh yeah. So we're just really concerned about this rule. We obviously believe that patients' health should come first, and these decisions should always be made based on like what's going to keep people healthiest. People should have access to critical care. And so not only does this like actually empower people to kind of prevent access to certain kinds of healthcare, but even most people don't understand the ins and outs of rules and regulations and laws. And so even just this kind of perception that discrimination is being encouraged will just have a huge chilling effect on people's access to care, even when it's not being applied exactly as the rule is written. So this just has a huge impact on folks' access to care.
I mean, I can imagine if I were about to go find care, I would really be thinking twice because you don't know what you're going to run into, and you have to like mentally prepare yourself to deal with potential abuse. And, like just, I put off going to the doctor anyway. Like just, as a person, because I don't want to spend the money or take the time. And I can't imagine facing something like that on top of it. And oh my God.
And then when you get there, you have to decide if you're going to lie about every important things about yourself. Yeah.
But and it gets back to what Cheryl was saying a couple of weeks ago of like, you might not be honest about what's going on because you're afraid of getting turned away for treatment, and that might actually be inhibiting you to having a more or less easy diagnosis of figuring out what's going on, and you don't want to say it, so there's like no way to get to it, which is fucking stupid.
Exactly.
And the baseline access to care for trans folks is already like pretty bad in a rough spot. So many doctors just don't understand trans healthcare. It's not often taught in medical schools. They don't always go and take continuing education on it. So a lot of folks are just, it's not even super complicated. If you've done hormone replacement therapy for cis women, you're fairly well equipped to kind of do it. For trans women, for example, but just a lot of people's unfamiliarity with it either makes them unwilling to work with trans folks already, or they're willing to help, but they don't necessarily know what current standards are, what current practices are. And so trans folks, it's already kind of a crapshoot when you go to see the doctor. First, whether they even know anything about trans people, whether they'll be willing to treat you, and then even if they are, like if they're even competent about trans care. I know a lot of folks, me included, wind up kind of telling their doctors more about how to treat trans patients than their doctors are able to bring up on their own. So this is just entering into a landscape that's already kind of bleak for trans folks, and especially more marginalized trans folks, like poor trans people, people of color, who are already dealing with like all these extra barriers.
Right, exactly. Society has already put a ton of stuff on them. Anyway,
Yeah.
All right. All right, so we're absolutely behind making another call. So actually, we're not going to call this time. How would you have us reach out?
Yeah, so there's a handy-dandy pre-made way to take action on most proposed regulations and rules, which is submitting a comment to HHS, to the agency that's implementing the rule. And so in this case, I think we have links both to the federal comment form on regulations.gov. And then there are two groups who are actually orchestrating physical comment drop-offs. So they'll go in with a stack and just kind of lay them down on an HHS desk. So the National Center for Transgender Equality is doing one of those, and then the National Women's Law Center is doing one of those. And kind of NCTEs is going to be kind of focused on trans people's access to healthcare, and I think the National Women's Law Center is going to be focused on, access to abortion and reproductive care. And so if folks are willing to, or would like their comment to be kind of included in a big satisfying stack to be thumped down on a desk, there are also two portals that NCTE and National Women's Law Center have set up for you to submit comments there as well.
So those links in the chat, and we will include them when we put the podcast that will put this in there to you.
Karen, now we can't hear you.
Yeah, Karen, you are garbled as hell. I'm sorry. I think she was saying that we would share the links to those on the
episode notes,
show notes and on the Facebook
Now
page.
I can't hear anyone. Can y'all hear me?
Oh no!
We can hear you.
We were doing
oh my God, what is happening?
well. Oh no!
Maybe it'll come back.
Oh, I feel so bad. We were doing perfectly. Right?
All right.
I feel like, honestly, though, you guys, I go through this recording every single day when I do my podcast at night, and it feels weirdly validating to have you all see firsthand how none of us touched anything. Nobody did anything, and yet it's just like, no, I'm done. I think you've talked enough. We're fine now.
Time's up.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, now we don't.
Oh, now I don't hear you. Yeah.
Do you hear me?
But now it looks like she hears us. Yeah, she couldn't hear us, and now she can hear us, and we can't hear her. Oh, Corinne, I'm sorry.
However, that was some fantastic information.
It was really good information.
I mean, I'm not encouraged and happy, but at least I feel empowered, and I have some ideas.
Oh, she's back.
I didn't even do anything that time.
See?
It's Gremlins.
Gremlins. Yeah.
We just push you back.
Yeah.
Go team. And so I'm going to go with the one that has salsa labs in the link, which I believe is the one that is about trans issues in particular.
Yeah, that's in CTE's page.
All right, so that's what I'm going to fill out specifically, and we can all do that together right now and do that real quick. But I also was wondering if you had any good news you could share with us so that we don't just weep our way through the evening.
Yeah, I do have some good news to share, which is that some states are stepping up and trying to provide protections at the same time that the federal government is taking them away. So for example, in California this year, there's a bill that's working on guaranteeing access to transition-related care for minors in the foster system. So like most foster system bills around now that are oriented around LGBT stuff are bad. Most of them are attacks, but this is actually a proactive bill that's seeking to make sure that in the Foster Care Bill of Rights in California, that the right to access to trans-related care is in there. And then there are some states that have added coverage of certain trans medical procedures to their state Medicaid programs. And then there are also states who are working on that in terms of private insurance and insurance on the marketplace exchanges. It's because one of the areas that we're also worried that an attack is still coming down the pipeline from the federal government is they've been trying to get rid of Obamacare for a long time. But Obamacare was actually great in terms of improving access to coverage for trans folks because of the Section 1557 rule there, which is a rule interpreting the non-discrimination provisions of the law. And so it actually covers trans folks, protects them from discrimination in the provision of services of healthcare. And actually, in that part of the code, it covers both trans people and people who are seeking access to contraceptive care, people based on their reproductive choices. So that section 5057 of the Affordable Care Act has actually been really crucial to making sure that trans folks have access to care, because that meant that there couldn't be trans exclusions in marketplace plans anymore. In the past, like many healthcare plans just had explicit trans exclusions saying they wouldn't cover anything trans related. And after that rule came out, like that was expressly forbidden. And so states were kind of slow to catch up, and exclusion still exists in a lot of places. But there has been a lot of movement over the last couple of years to make sure that people were complying with that part of the Affordable Care Act. I think that Nevada just this week added some coverage for certain transition-related services, so that's cool. And I think that there are a couple other states who had done that for their Medicaid programs, and then there are states, I think, like I believe, don't hold me to this, but I think that Washington is actually working on at least one bill, making sure that access to care is available to everybody there. So like states are taking steps forward. And then conversion therapy bans have actually been pretty successful the last couple of years, which is super exciting. So conversion therapy is the practice where it often happens to kids. Like often religious parents will send their kids to like a religious therapist whose goal is not to assist the kid with any problems they're experiencing, not to help them become more comfortable with themselves, but to force them to go through some really kind of horrible and torturous, they call it therapy, but I don't even know what term you would use to try to change their
conditioning.
Orientation or gender identity. So there's been a lot of success in that front. That's kind of being led at the national level by the Trevor Project, which you may have heard of, is the group that runs kind of suicide hotlines for queer people. And so they've gone through and they're trying to improve those laws in places. So there is stuff to be excited about, and there's a lot of places to plug in if this stuff fires you up. I know that most people probably aren't super excited to drop a comment in a box on a federal website. So I'm super glad that y'all are here.
It's all, you know what, we do it all. We called on the Title IX because that was ridiculous. We called on the transgender ban in the military because that was ridiculous. And we are more than happy to fill in comments on this because it's ridiculous. Yeah. And why people aren't people, I have no idea. Like once we got past the 3/5 compromise, like are we not over it completely? All right.
It really does get to a point where it's just like, aren't you bored? Don't you have something better to focus your time on? You just pain in the asses.
Hey,
and it takes no time to fill these out, guys. I just did the NCTE one, and I'm gonna obviously post the links and everything, but they have a whole big script that you can use, but you can type in your own thing. And I didn't swear, but I was very forceful with my language.
Yes, we do encourage folks to be civil in these. Yes. It helps your comment be counted. And also, so the way, sorry, I didn't mean to cut anybody off.
You were probably going to say something related to what I was going to say. You go first, and then I'm going to go.
All right. And so the way that these comments work, and especially over the last year, is that agencies who review these comments and kind of put together the summary of them have been a lot stricter about counting comments as individual comments. And so while there are a lot of scripts out there that you can use, and because numbers are really important, so you want to make sure the barriers are really low for folks to like get on and submit a comment. It really helps if you can kind of customize it, if you can like share some personal stories on like why this is important to you or important to your friends or family, just to make sure that your comment is representing like your views as an individual. And it also helps in terms of kind of the numbers, because they can't just say, oh look, we got 3,000 comments that were exactly the same, so surely we're going to discount that. So making sure that you're kind of putting in your personal touch and experience is really important with these.
Exactly. I was just going to say that. So I'm going to tell a story about when my husband, who was in transition, had an allergic attack and wound up at the hospital. They did not, and he was sitting there, like you were saying, explaining about the hormone therapy and what that did and like why his blood pressure was low and all these things. And the nurse had no idea what he was talking about, couldn't understand why he was taking the drugs he was explaining that he was taking. And he's in the middle of an anaphylactic shock and about to die. And he's like having to explain what drugs are going to be okay or not. And it was also so horrifying. And the idea of taking a step backwards and saying, not only is that okay, like we should be going forward and we should be demanding that people have training and education in this, not backwards and saying, actually, that's fine. In fact, she shouldn't have even tried to help. Like, I've been thinking away at that story while you've been talking, so that's gonna be my submission. And so, yeah, if you guys don't just paste in the script, do what Natasha did and put some extra stuff in there. I'm telling my story, and that's how it gets counted, and that's what we're gonna do. All right.
Can I bring up one more question?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I think it's great that we're able to do comments like this, and I know I filled in a comment form on net neutrality a while ago, and making phone calls we know is a really great way to get your voice heard. Filling out comments like this, you know, there still are a lot of the online, what's the word I'm looking for? You know, the sign the petition. And so when you think about the best ways to go about getting your voice heard, where do each of those rank?
Yeah, so making calls to legislators about like a current issue where you're their constituent, that is probably the most effective most of the time. And so I know that comments probably feel like one of the least effective things to do because you just kind of hit submit and then it goes off into the ether and then but they actually are super important in terms of kind of demonstrating broad-based objection to what the administration is doing, and then they can also be important in litigation later. And this is like harder for individuals to do, but you know, when legal organizations submit comments, they're often making sure that they're including certain facts and things that they can then bring up later and say like, well, look, this issue was mentioned in the comment, so of course it's an issue now, but you had this warning, so this is what happened there. So like all these things are important, and I don't want to like rank them and say one is like less important than the other, but in terms of like immediate impact, and then also in terms of like how you feel after it, you're right that comment submitting is probably doesn't feel quite as exciting as some other methods of engagement.
Well, and I don't even know about that. I'm happy to know that there's a way that I can go online and submit something that's meaningful. Mm-hmm. I kind of question if I sign on to a petition, how impactful that is. So for me, in my mind, it's great to distinguish between the two.
Yeah, definitely. So the agencies that are issuing these regulations are actually required to read every comment that they get. So they actually have to look at that and account for it. And in the reports they put out summarizing the comments, they respond to most of the arguments that are raised in comments. That's kind of how they have to do it. And a petition, you know, they can just say, they don't have to read it. They can, oh, we saw that gay organization had 21,000 signatures on thing, whatever. That's what they're going to do. But they actually are required to go through comments in a way that they often aren't with petitions. And so that's kind of one difference there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And also don't forget to like tweets. That's good. You should do that.
Yeah.
To what was that, Karen?
To like tweets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would mean I'd have to get on Twitter.
I kid. Yes, the comments that matter are the ones that you're putting in directly to suggested changes to regulations.
Yeah.
And so we've done that with other agencies. So this is a good one, and this is an important one. And so, we're right in the comment period, right? So when does the comment period expire?
So it ends on March 27th. So folks have until then to submit their comments. And again, like you can either submit it through the federal regulations website, or you can use one of those two portals that NCTE and National Women's Law Center have up if you would like your comment to be in the big old stack that they're going to drop off.
Something like that.
And if you're in DC, I think there's going to be an event for comment delivery. So if you would like to be kind of part of the posse that drops off a big stack and you're in DC, you can do that too.
Nothing better than an angry mob. All right.
Yeah.
All right, ladies, any other questions before we wrap up?
Nope.
No, I found a couple of facts that might be a little interesting. So first I want to say actually that, Corinne, I really appreciate that you can talk about this issue or all of these issues in a way that's, I don't want to call it professional, but you do a really good job of talking about it without getting angry.
Thank you. Well,
because as I was like trying to write out my thoughts about this today, I just started getting angry, and my husband heard all of it, and so I just really appreciate it. I think you must be in the role you're intended to be in. So
thank you.
Wanted to start with that, but so I found this brief from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, and so it explains that basically in the state of Washington, half of all hospital beds are provided by Catholic hospitals. And so by law, these hospitals have to have like an in-house pharmacy, and that according to obviously like Catholic church teachings, they can't dispense like Plan B or, like they can't help in those ways even. And so then I went to the Planned Parenthood website and looked up the number of clinics in Washington. And so it looked like there's 33 clinics in Washington. And of course, all of, so like if we take like you have half of your hospitals in a state and then 33 clinics around the state who would either be like defunded, partially defunded, right? Like affected a lot. So anyway, that's just like access to basic healthcare. And I started thinking about like, transgender people in an emergency, right? Like if something happens, you're in an emergency, you don't know where to go. Health insurance is already complicated. Where are they going to take you? And will that hospital reject you? And like, anyway, I don't even have a complete thought about it that I can submit a comment yet, because it does make me so upset. But I'm going to refine those facts and put those facts into a comment, and I'm going to submit those. So I just wanted to share that comment.
And it's so interesting because once you start drawing the line about who you won't help, it's easier to take that universe of who you won't help and expand. Yeah. That's terrifying.
Yeah.
And it's like, who are we protecting, right? Like, so if you need medical care and you're coming, like maybe you just want to live. Maybe that's like a simple thing and that's all you want. And that's hard, right? Like, so, and the health insurance is already hard. So why are we making it hard to live? I don't know.
Maybe we need to surround ourselves in an entire womb every time we go to the hospital. Then they'll take care of it.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I just can't imagine your mindset being like, oh, I'm going to sleep better tonight knowing that I didn't help someone.
Really?
Like that's your stance in life? Okay, cool. I guess we're clear then on what kind of person you are. I just don't become a doctor then. Just don't do it. That's clearly not what you want. So, anyway, I'm calming down again.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to rile it up, but
keep percolating and then.
Yeah, but I just it's a good call. It's a great thing for for me to be a part of and to see and to realize that I need to refine even my own arguments to help. Like it's just. I don't know how it can't just be clear to help people, but it's not. So we've got to do something.
Yeah, and if you hit on the perfect formula for spinning up and generating comments, be on the lookout for any changes to the 1557 rule of the Affordable Care Act, because that'll be the next opportunity probably to submit federal comments on healthcare access for trans folks and people accessing reproductive care.
Awesome. And I trust you'll keep me in the loop, and then I can keep going. All
Absolutely.
Right.
Awesome.
All right. Ladies, I love you all. Thank you very much. And let's go make a difference.
Woo!
Thank you all so much. Thank you for Corinne for being here.
Yeah,
thank you.
Y'all are doing great stuff.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.